Our story begins deep inside a dark and mysterious forest, where there are many dangers all around. A boy in white tattered clothes was running along gloomy dark paths. The main character's name was Prince Cheon. He was out of breath and ran with all his strength. His strength was almost exhausted. Suddenly he tripped over a branch and fell from a small cliff onto his back. As soon as Prince Cheon landed on the ground after falling, he tried to get up, but he had no strength at all. He was very weak. Raising his head, Prince Cheon saw his pursuers, who were one step ahead. Ninjas stood in front of him in a special kimono. They hid their faces under black masks. Cheon understood that they came with bad intentions, and now he had nowhere to run. The assassins were surprised that Cheon was able to get here in such a short period of time. Then they took out their swords and began to surround Cheon in order to capture him and prevent him from escaping. Cheon was very angry with these people, so he suddenly began to take out his sharp knife. The head mercenary looked into the eyes of the prince and asked him if he had trained in martial arts. Prince Cheon remained silent. He believed that he needed to fight to the end, no matter what. A few seconds later, 4 fighters from this gang began to attack the defenseless boy. They attacked Prince Cheon at once. These ninjas wanted to quickly deal with this boy. Suddenly one of the fighters, with a quick wave of his hand, knocked his knife out of the prince's hands. Prince Cheon was disarmed, and one of the fighters grabbed him by the neck and began to choke him. However, the main character did not think of giving up at all. He began to take out a second knife from behind his back. A few seconds later, Cheon dealt a powerful blow to the neck of one of the warriors. The prince killed the warrior, but Cheon had very little strength left, so he could not even get to his feet. The other warriors still could not understand how an ordinary boy could cope with one of their comrades. Just a moment later, another ninja pounced on Cheon and mercilessly kneed him in the head. Prince Cheon did not expect this sudden blow. He immediately felt dizzy. The warrior took out his sword and struck Prince Cheon in the stomach with a strong blow. This ninja caused Prince Cheon to experience unbearable sharp pain in his stomach with his blow. Suddenly, a strong flash appeared next to the main character. This bright light blinded all the mercenary warriors. A couple of seconds later, a yellow portal formed in front of these mercenaries, which began to suck in one of the gang's warriors. This warrior could not do anything. He was thrown away from Prince Cheon and fell straight to the ground. The other warriors were shocked by what was happening. They could not believe their eyes. A few meters away from these warriors stood a man, his body glowing with blue magical waves. This magician was dressed very strangely. He was the supreme master of all the greatest magicians. The main mercenary wanted to kill this strange guy by cutting his throat with his sharp sword, but the supreme master simply stood still. He was not afraid of these warriors. He lowered his head. He was ready to attack. Suddenly, all the warriors were again blinded by a strong flash of yellow light. When they opened their eyes, they did not understand where that guy with magic had disappeared so suddenly. The boss of this gang realized that this guy with magical powers was able to instantly disappear and become completely transparent, like water. The main mercenary of the gang decided to leave this place as soon as possible. He told all his warriors to immediately begin their retreat. But the magician was not going to let this gang of warriors go so easily. So with one wave of his hand, he caused a magical wave. After this, the gang boss was amazed by the magical abilities of this unknown master, and the main mercenary began to fall straight to the ground. Prince Cheon, although he was very badly wounded, still smiled when he saw his enemies die. Suddenly, this magician approached Cheon and told him that he was his ancestor, but the main character's eyes became cloudy, so he could not clearly see this master. The magic master looked at his watch and realized that he urgently had to leave this place. Therefore, he decided that it was time to hurry. Then this guy began to take some kind of syringe out of his pocket. He brought this syringe directly to Cheon's chest and injected some liquid into his body. The master of magic understood that he had saved Prince Cheon's life. The unknown magician finally wished good luck to Cheon. He was glad to help his ancestor. Before disappearing, the master of magic said that the liquid he injected into Cheon's body contained a special development called Nano Machine. After these words, the master instantly disappeared, and Prince Cheon lay on the ground and did not understand what had happened to him. Suddenly, Cheon felt better. He stopped feeling pain, and he also began to hear some strange sounds in his head. Long ago, warriors of the Celestial Empire developed a special martial art for their defense. They passed on their knowledge and skills to the next generation through books and records. Also on this land lived people who mastered a special martial art. People called them Murins. One day, young scientists united, wanting to gain more power and knowledge. Only senior warriors possessed this knowledge. The older warriors did not want to share their knowledge. And because of this, the people of Morena were divided into two societies. Some were called traitors, and others were considered loyalists. For several years, there was enmity between these two societies, when suddenly a completely new race called Magi suddenly appeared, and their teaching was called magic. This story is about a warrior who wanted to overthrow the Lord of Magic and become the most important ruler of the people. This is the story of Prince Cheon-yun. After the bloody battle, Prince Cheon woke up in a warm bed. He was very excited about what happened. Cheon did not understand how he survived. He was sure that after a strong blow to the stomach with a sword, it was impossible to survive. At that moment, Prince Cheon noticed on his hand some strange black and unknown spot. Cheon's whole body was covered in these spots. His body was also very sticky, and the prince smelled strongly of a poisonous odor. Suddenly, someone greeted Prince Cheon. The main character did not understand who was talking to him because there was no one in the room. The prince quickly got out of bed. He thought that someone was lying next to him. Cheon was very scared and did not understand where this voice was coming from. Cheon understood that there was no one around. The main character heard this voice again. Someone asked him to calm down. Prince Cheon realized that this voice was coming straight from his head, and this unknown voice confirmed Cheon's assumptions. Then, the main character began to ask the voice who he really was. The voice replied that he was a 7th-generation Nano Machine that had established a connection with Cheon's brain. At first, the prince did not believe the Nano Machine. He believed that it was impossible. Cheon wanted the voice to tell the truth. Prince Cheon knelt down. He couldn't believe what was happening. While the main character was in complete shock from this Nano Machine, two people were talking about something outside the window of his house. White Counselor Pak, that was the name of the old man with a gray beard, he asked the young warrior whether it was true that they wanted to kill Mr. Cheon. The warrior said that the prince was indeed attacked. He said that this was not the first time he had been attacked. White Advisor Pak thought he believed that the prince was attacked by warriors from the magical organization of the North. The young warrior said that someone helped Prince Cheon in the battle, but it is impossible to find out who saved the young prince. Yesterday, this warrior saw a terrible sight. Pieces of bodies torn in half lay on the cold ground. Only one of the attacking warriors was lucky to remain unharmed. A knife that belonged to Prince Cheon was sticking out of his neck. Suddenly, the young warrior heard someone's breathing. A mutilated, bloody body lay nearby. It was Prince Cheon-yun. He was lying on his back, unconscious. While the warrior was telling yesterday's story, the White Advisor asked if there were any wounds on the prince's body after the battle. The warrior said that there were no wounds on Cheon's body at all. The White Advisor was still trying to understand who helped Cheon during the battle. He knew for sure that the heads of other gangs definitely would not have saved the young prince. At this time, Cheon questioned his Nano Machine. He asked her who saved him during the battle. The Nano Machine replied that she did not save him, but only restored his body. Suddenly, the Nano Machine said that it was going to download basic information directly into the prince's brain, to which Cheon gave his consent. After these words, the main character was paralyzed by magical waves. Then Cheon suddenly became ill and began to feel sick. The Nano Machine said that nausea is always present during the first transfer of information. There is nothing to worry about. The prince asked the Nano Machine if it was true that there were now many small mechanisms in it. She replied that right now there were about 6 billion mechanisms in it. Cheon then asked if the Nano Machina could leave his body if he wanted. The Nano Machine replied that this was only possible in the event of his death. And at that moment, Prince Cheon realized that the mysterious master of magic who saved him had inserted this Nano Machine into his body using a syringe. Suddenly, a young warrior knocked on Prince Cheon's room, along with a White Advisor. The prince heard a knock on the door. He asked the Nano Machine to sit quietly. Cheon did not want others to see him talking to himself. After these words, the Nano Machine said that it could communicate with the prince through thoughts. After a few seconds, it went into sleep mode. As soon as the warrior entered the room, he told the advisor to be quiet. He saw the prince lying in his bed. When the warrior approached the bed, he immediately began asking Cheon if he was okay. As he approached the prince, he smelled a very unpleasant smell. Then an advisor approached Cheon's bed. The prince immediately recognized this man. Quite a long time ago, this White Advisor came to treat the prince's mother. The old man wanted to measure the prince's heartbeat. so the advisor asked Cheon to extend his hand. As soon as the main character extended his hand, the old man was very surprised. The warrior was very alarmed by the advisor's behavior. He thought that Cheon had some kind of illness. However, the advisor reassured his comrade. He said that everything was the other way around. The white advisor said that all the toxins had left Cheon's body. Perhaps the prince was taking some kind of medicine. Neither the young warrior nor Prince Cheon understood what the white advisor was talking about. The advisor replied that now the protagonist's body was in ideal shape to study martial arts. Then Cheon realized that all these black sticky spots on his body were the toxins that came out of his body. The prince realized that it was all done by a nano machine. At this time, the nano machine had already turned off its sleep mode, after which the nano machine informed the prince that it had removed all the black spots and toxins from his body and also increased his muscles for sports. Then Prince Cheon realized that his life would change greatly with the appearance of this nano machine in his body. The magical cult was created by many families and clans, but only 6 of them turned out to be the most influential. Namely, the clans of Darkness, Spring, Sword, Sound, Poison, Blade. The chief Lord Magician promised that he would marry every woman from the main clans so that they would give birth to heirs for him. Each successor or prince was brought up according to the strictest customs. And then he entered the Magic Academy. The Magic Academy opens its doors every 10 years and trains the best warriors of a generation, sometimes even having intense rivalries. This time comes when several princes enter the academy in 1 year. This time is called the Battle of the Heirs of the Magistrate. Cheon turned sharply away from Dr. Park. He didn't want to tell him about the nano machine that established a connection with his brain. Dr. Park summed up the results and prescribed Cheon a special remedy to restore energy, and Warrior Chan thanked him for his help. The advisor went about his business, then pondered how Cheon's body could change so much in just 1 day. A few years ago, Dr. Park thought that the prince would be quickly killed due to his weak body and lack of martial arts knowledge. But now everything has changed. The white advisor decided that Prince Cheon had been hiding his true powers all this time, and he himself had been secretly training. At this time, Cheon was still lying in bed. He hoped that the doctor did not find out his secret about the nano machine. Cheon understood that his life was influenced not only by the nano machine, but also by his bodyguard Chan, who came running in time and took him to a safe place. A couple of minutes later, Cheon was already in the jacuzzi and talking about something important. Cheon asked the nano machine a question about restoring damage to the body and what damage could be healed. The nano machine said that all internal and external damage caused by an external source will be regenerated. Also, in the event of the loss of any limb, regeneration will take a longer period because cell division will be required. Cheon couldn't believe it, and so he decided to test it in practice. He stabbed himself in the arm, and the system activated self-healing mode from a knife wound. Cheon's hand immediately began to emit an incomprehensible green light. The blood stopped and coagulated in a split second, and the hand became whole and unharmed again. The prince decided to ask the nano machine if he could use all the functions that had moved into his brain. The nano robot responded positively. When Cheon got out of the bath, he noticed that his body became more muscular and pumped up. At that moment, his servant came to him and brought clothes for the prince. The servant began to put clothes on Cheon, and the voice in his head continued to explain to Cheon about the structure of the body. But Cheon understood absolutely nothing. The prince at this time came up with a name for the nano machine. He simply called it Nano. Meanwhile, the nano machine suggested that Cheon find a book and leaf through it. Cheon went into the library and found a book that, according to Nano's instructions, he just had to flip through. He opened a book about martial arts and began to read carefully. Nano said that he copied all the information and offered to transfer the information to Cheon's head, to which the prince agreed. Everything around Cheon sparkled. Some kind of blue electric wave came out of his eyes. Cheon watched as magical waves lifted the book into the air. These waves transmitted Cheon's information from the book to his brain. After a couple of seconds, the transfer was completed and Cheon almost vomited again. After some time, this effect of vomiting should have disappeared. The prince sat down on a chair and asked Nano how he could use the knowledge gained from the book. Nano said, "Just think about the topic of blood points." Cheon began to think a little, and almost instantly was able to pronounce all the information contained in the book he read. Cheon began to sweat from strong surprise. Then the prince realized that this is a whole teaching and understanding that is stored in his head. Keon was now confident that he could learn any information about martial arts from books faster than anyone else. Cheon went outside. He remembered that when he was little, he watched the warriors who practiced the 3 Jazim method of fighting, but he himself could not repeat this. But thanks to Nano and new capabilities, Cheon will now be able to study this method and become the strongest in the academy. Meanwhile, in the castle of the heir to the demonic cult in the southern part of the Republic, one of the leaders named Prince Mukyum could not believe that Prince Cheon could not be killed by his 5 mercenaries. His subordinate assured his lord that someone had helped Cheon survive and deal with all his comrades. Mukyum believed that next time Cheon would be easy to kill, since he had low-class blood. Then Prince Mukyum made a new plan to kill Cheonyon. He wanted to kill the main character right in the Magic Academy. At that moment, Cheon was lying in his bed and thinking about the academy. Getting out of bed, Cheon opened the window and saw how the sun had long risen above the horizons. Today, Prince Cheon was supposed to enter the Magic Academy, so he was a little worried. Suddenly, Cheon noticed bodyguard Chan, who was conducting morning training. His punches were simply perfect, and his technique, which he had honed over the years, was magnificent. Cheon looked at him with envy and also thought of mastering Chan's dagger technique. Nano read Cheon's thoughts, so she invited him to scan Chan's special movements. Cheon clarified about Nano's ability to scan special combat moves, to which Nano responded positively. But suddenly Cheon started thinking. He was thinking about whether it would be fair to borrow Chan's technique without his permission. Cheon understood that he would soon have to go to the academy, where he would need to be able to apply self-defense and defense skills. So he had no time to talk about honesty. Cheon finally made up his mind and asked Nano to scan Chan's movements. The scanning immediately began successfully. Bodyguard Chan continued to train hard, honing his punches, and Nano, through Cheon's eye, calmly and quickly scanned all the information about Chan's combat movements. Chan moved on to other movements, blocking defenses and handling the sword, and Nano continued to read every movement of the fighter. After 30 minutes, Chan completed the workout and the scan was successful. The transfer of information from the martial art of Chan's dagger directly into the brain of Prince Cheon began. After a couple of seconds of torment, the transfer was completed and Cheon quickly came to his senses. Unlike yesterday, the prince began to feel and understand all the movements, concerting them in his head. This was a great surprise for Cheon. He immediately jumped up and grabbed his blade and began to take it out to try out a new combat technique. But before that, the prince decided not to catch Chan's eye and practice in his room. Otherwise, Chan would definitely suspect something. Cheon closed the window and stood in a fighting pose, and began to feel the technique that people had been studying for years. His eyes glowed blue and he was perfectly prepared to imitate all of Chan's fighting moves. Cheon darted across the room in a split second, repeating several of Chan's bodyguard's blows. The prince felt that he could easily repeat all the movements of bodyguard Chan, who had studied and practiced them for 20 years. And suddenly Cheon was suddenly struck by a very strong pain. The main character lost control over his body. The pain was so severe that the prince could not even stand on his feet. Cheon fell to his knees. He could no longer feel his arms and legs. Nano said that there was damage to the weak muscles of the Cheon, which are not adapted to such strong training. So it was necessary to transfer contractions to the muscles. Nano suggested that the prince transfer all his energy to the muscles of the body in order to painlessly master other people's fighting techniques. The Nano Machine also offered to administer anesthesia in order to reduce the severe pain during this transfer. But Cheon decided not to use it for now. The process began, and Cheon was completely covered by an electric field. Suddenly, something went wrong, and Prince Cheon was pierced by severe pain, as if thousands of needles had pierced every cell of his body. Nano realized that the user was in pain and immediately administered a painkiller, and Cheon lost consciousness under the influence of anesthesia. He fell on the bed with a frightened expression on his face. Warrior Chan heard some strange sounds coming from the prince's room, so he immediately ran to Cheon to see if he was okay. Chan opened the door to Cheon's bedroom with great speed in order to understand what was happening here. Seeing the prince, Chan began to approach him. He wanted to check Cheon's pulse. But suddenly his attention was diverted by the marks left by Cheon while studying martial movements and techniques. Taking a careful look at these marks, the bodyguard realized that in such a short period of time, the prince was able to achieve a high level of skill. Chan was very proud of Cheon. After another couple of hours, Cheon finally woke up. He didn't understand at first, But Nano calmed him down and said that he had successfully transmitted all the information to his muscle fibers. Suddenly, the frightened Cheon realized that he found himself on the bed. He realized that Cheon had come to his room, but Cheon decided not to think about it. He decided to test his skills in action and make sure that data was transferred to the muscles. He exhaled and took out his sharp blade, after which he took a fighting stance. The prince decided to concentrate on his movements. Cheon made a lightning-fast strike with his blade forward. This strike was perfectly copied by his body. The prince repeated blow after blow. He noticed that his strength and accuracy increased several times. This process was the first step for the formation and training of new combat knowledge. Suddenly, Prince Cheon thought about it. He realized that he had made a stupid mistake. While Cheon was practicing his new fighting moves, severe cuts and scratches from the blade were left on the floor. While the prince was looking at the rugged floor, someone knocked on the door of his room. It was bodyguard Chan. He opened the door slightly, and in his hands was a large tray of food. The main character was very excited. He didn't want to show the scratches he left on the wooden floor. A minute later, Chan put the tray on the table. There were Cheon's favorite dishes. Cheon, without hesitation, quickly began to devour this delicious food, as he was very hungry. After breakfast, bodyguard Chan asked the prince a question. He asked him when he managed to master the dagger technique. Cheon got nervous. He realized that Chan had found out about his new technique from somewhere. The prince said that he didn't know what kind of military technique it was. Then warrior Chan pointed his finger at the scratches and marks on the wooden floor. Chan knew that this mark on the floor marked the transition to the second formation of the dagger technique. Prince Cheon felt ashamed, because in the city of Murim, where the prince lived, stealing other people's equipment was a real crime. But Chan didn't even think about being offended by Cheon, but only praised him for his desire to learn a new skill. The bodyguard handed over a special piece of paper with training in dagger techniques, so that Cheon could better master his fighting movements. Cheon gathered all his thoughts into a fist and promised Chan that from now on, there would no longer be a single fear in him. A little later, the grand opening of the academy began, which was attended by more than 1,000 people and many clans. A couple of minutes later, a man in a huge raincoat began to come out to the teenagers from the academy, who was clearly very aggressive and angry. He did not like the poor organization and discipline of the students. This man was one of the Academy Lord's bodyguards. His name was Lee Hwam-young. He looked carefully at the first row, in which stood the heirs of the 6 best clans. The first student's name was Jean Muyon. He was the heir to the Darkness clan. The second was the heir of the Sword clan named Jean Kyung-wong. He was very self-confident. The third was the heir of the Stream clan, Jong Mukum. This student was very irritable. The fourth was the heir to the Poison clan named Panjung Junsum. The fifth was the heir of the Blade clan, Jong Yuchan. He was obviously very calm. The sixth was the only girl heiress of the Sound clan. Her name was Chan Wanryu. And number 7 was supposed to be Prince Cheon, but he was not there. This news surprised Lee Hwam-young a little. Lee Hwam-young noticed Cheon in the last row, and it was very funny for him to see him all alone at the end of the crowd. However, he believed that Prince Cheon was deliberately trying to gain more attention in this way. At this moment, the musicians began to play sharply into special acoustic pipes, and after this solemn sound, the Lord with 2 more bodyguards began to emerge from the academy. The Lord was quite old, over 60 years old, but he was happy to see the Demon Academy open again. The Lord was also followed by 2 of his bodyguards, one of whom was wearing a mask, and the other looked a little tired. This bodyguard couldn't really walk and kept stumbling. This seriously angered Lee Hwam-young, who immediately realized that he was very drunk again. This tired bodyguard's name was Seob Mang, nicknamed Mad Blade, and he started calling Lee Hwam-young names because he was looking at him strangely. A fight almost broke out between them, but the main guard, a bodyguard named Mirakium, ordered them both to shut up with his menacing appearance. The Lord's name was Cheon Yu-jong, and he sat on his throne of honor. The Lord was one of the 5 strongest in the city of Murim. All the students, seeing him live, immediately became quiet and stood up as if they were quiet. They were all afraid of the Lord because of his character. Cheon also felt an aura of excitement, because in fact this Lord was his own father. The chief security guard came forward and demanded complete silence from everyone. After this, the Lord stood up and said in a loud, deafening tone that all students would be responsible for the future prosperity of the cult of the academy. The Lord also said that in this academy all students will hone their skills and become part of the magical cult. After finishing the solemn speech, the students began to support the Lord with their voices. They were glad to study at such a prestigious academy. At this time, Lee Hwam-young announced the completion of the Lord's speech and congratulated everyone on their arrival at the Magic Academy. The students thought that the show was over and began to discuss their future plans for studying in this place. However, Lee Hwam-young didn't like the wild noise of the crowd, so he ordered all the students to shut up immediately. He said that they will study at the academy for 4 years, which consist of 6 stages. After each stage an exam is held, you can pass this exam only once. This news caused a stormy wave of negative emotions among the crowd. The students were alarmed. Lee Hwam-young finally saw in the eyes of the young students the understanding of the seriousness of this training, because if they failed the test, they would be immediately expelled. Many thought that one chance to pass the exam was unfair, but after each stage passed, the student will receive privileges and special items. Bodyguard Lee said that after the first stage, students will be given a black Dragon Ball. The students standing next to Cheon began to say that with the help of this ball, one can easily learn the Nagong technique, which has been studied for 20 years. Cheon realized that he definitely needed to get this Dragon Ball. Lord Lee's bodyguard said that the second item was a book of martial arts secrets, which was very useful to any student. After all, there are only 5 floors in the Demonic Academy. Each time you pass the test, the next floor will open. People who have reached the limit will be given the opportunity to study the most dangerous arts. Many students wish to reach this limit of skill. Cheon understood that the Book of Martial Arts would be much more important to him than the special Nagong technique. But Lee Hwam-young continued his speech and was about to name the third final advantage. This advantage promised students who went to the end to receive a title that was never possible for anyone who came. With each stage, starting from the first, the student will receive the title of a low-rank warrior, ending with the 5th stage, the title of clan leader. But there is also a 6th stage, which Lee Hwam-young decided to remain silent about. After all, in his opinion, many of those present will not be able to even get to stage 3, despite their hard work and desire to get there. Seob Mang also believed that stage 6 was almost impossible because in the entire history, only 10 people had passed this stage. Finally, Lee informed all students that the rank would increase depending on the test stage passed, and now all students would start from the lowest rank of cadet. Cheon listened to these words. He really wanted to show others his true strength. Then Lee Hwam-young loudly said that the first test would begin right now. Everyone who could pass this test would be divided into groups, and the rest would be eliminated. Cheon clearly did not expect such a statement and got a little worried, because he was almost not ready for the test. Discontent and some fear flared up throughout the crowd of students. Many believed that this was not fair. Suddenly, Lee Hwam-young shut up all the students. He said that students who fail the exam will be expelled and will not receive any rank. Cheon understood perfectly well that if he did not pass this test, then his cult would be the weakest, and they could kill him without any problems. Mukium, who had been trying to kill him for several years, laughed in the forefront of the crowd. He was sure that Cheon would quickly leave this academy. Suddenly, for everyone, a woman with a musical instrument came forward right in front of the crowd of students. Her name was Hong Soyu. She was an elder of the magic cult, as well as the leader of the Sound Clan. When this woman approached bodyguard Lee, he began to introduce her to all the students and said that she would be their first examiner. According to Lee Hwam-young, the test should be easy, and if someone fails it, he will automatically be considered the scum of society. No one understood what the test would consist of, because the students did not know what the leader of the Sound Clan, Hong Soyu, was capable of. And suddenly everyone covered their ears. At that moment, the main character did not understand what was happening there. Lee Hwam-young said that it was an energy sound wave. If the wave was launched at full force, it would take the lives of many students. Lee Hwam-young informed the students that all students who could stand for another minute and not fall from severe pain would automatically pass the first test. Without wasting a second, the leader of the Sound Clan, Hong Soyu, began to play her magic instrument. Immediately, a strong sound wave engulfed the entire academy site. Many immediately felt severe pain in their ears. Many students began to choke, some began to vomit, and some had already fainted. Lee Hwam-young observed all the students and expected that candidates from small clans had already dropped out, unlike the main heirs from strong clans. Mukum, with a proud smile, felt only a slight tingling in his ears. This exam was very simple for him, but suddenly the sound and pressure increased so much that even the heirs from the higher clans felt severe pain in their ears. In fact, the lady from the Sound clan began to play her musical instrument even more strongly. Many simply could not stand the sound. They felt very dizzy. And Mrs. Sound, with a gloomy face of anger, looked towards Cheon, who had not yet fallen to the ground. But he just stood there as if nothing had happened and didn't understand why everyone was twisting and shaking in pain, and he didn't even feel anything. Cheon examined the other students and thought that they had internal injuries and wondered why his organs were okay. To which Nano replied that he turned off his hearing and set up sound barriers, since he recognized high-frequency waves that could damage the prince's eardrum. But suddenly, Cheon's attention was diverted by the head of the Sound clan. This woman was very angry with the main character. She looked at Cheon with a piercing gaze, and clearly did not expect that Cheon would be able to resist her sound wave. Lee Hwamyoung realized that the fifth elder was already starting to cross all boundaries, since the power of her energy waves is many times stronger than it was at the beginning. And now it will be difficult for people who have trained Naegong for 20 years to resist her attacks. Lee Hwamyoung immediately realized that the reason for the fifth elder's anger was Prince Cheon, who stood there and didn't even tense up. Many in the crowd had already begun to bleed their ears from the pressure, even though they were in no less elite clans. Some held on with their last strength, because the honor of the clan and their own future at the academy were at stake. Mukam held on, but noticeably began to get nervous because he was already expending more energy. He did not understand what could have angered this elder woman so much. Then Prince Mukam decided to turn around. At that moment he was greatly horrified by what he saw. After all, Prince Cheon, who did not possess the energy of Naegong at all, was still standing in place, and did not fall to the ground at all, and did not writhe in pain. All the heirs from the higher clans also noticed Cheon standing in the distance. They were extremely surprised and did not believe their eyes. Cheon understood that if he could pass this test without a single hesitation, then they would definitely not believe that he did not have Naegong at all. Therefore, Cheon reluctantly asked Nano to inflict internal trauma on him so that he would not stand out too much from the crowd. Nano said that internal organ damage was very dangerous, but Cheon didn't care and ordered the Nano Machine to deliberately injure him after the competition ended. Meanwhile, the fifth elder played her instrument with all her might, because the minute was almost up and Cheon still did not fall. She couldn't believe that Cheon, who was not yet 15 years old, could withstand her powerful energy wave so easily. The fifth elder tensed even more, her pride not allowing her to give up. She began to play her instrument very powerfully. She was sure that after this attack, Cheon would fall to the ground unconscious. Lee Hwamyoung also felt the sudden strong energy waves and realized that it was very dangerous for the health of all students. Lee Hwamyoung immediately ordered the fifth elder to stop, because this was already too dangerous. She immediately understood his request, and saw that she had played too much and could not cope with her anger. Realizing her mistake, she stopped playing her guitar. On the site near the academy, only the wars of the 6 highest clans remained, and Prince Cheon stood behind them. Some students already felt better, and they exhaled with joy, trying to fully recover. Right bodyguard Seob, who had been sitting and drinking all this time, thought that if it had been a little more, everyone would have failed their first test. The fifth elder sat down on a chair, and couldn't believe that she had wasted half her energy out of anger. She believed that Prince Cheon-yun, who continued to stand as if nothing had happened, was to blame for all this chaos. But Cheon was already feeling bad, because the process of damage to internal organs had begun. This process was created by Nano. Cheon immediately felt severe pain in his chest, began to feel very sick, and then started bleeding from his mouth. Therefore, everyone turned their attention to Cheon. No one understood what was happening to him. Cheon got worse and worse. He fell to his knees. A lot of blood flowed out of him. Others thought that he was dying. Cheon himself did not expect this. But Nano said that he damaged 30% of the organs on his instructions, which caused the maximum possible hemorrhage. Lee Hwamyoung immediately rushed to the aid of the prince. He was afraid that Cheon might soon die. After all, if Cheon died because of the entrance test, all the responsibility for the death of the Lord's son would fall on his head, and therefore Hwamyoung could not allow this to happen. He immediately jumped to the prince, grabbed him by the hand, and asked how he felt and what happened to him. Then, due to high blood loss, Cheon began to gradually pass out, and Lee Hwamyoung tried to somehow help the prince until he lost consciousness. Lee Hwamyoung took his hand and decided to check how many times Cheon Naegong had been able to pass this stage of the test without hesitation. Imagine his surprise when he realized that Cheon did not have a single drop of Negong. Surprised, Lee Hwamyoung immediately handed Cheon over to the doctors and ordered him to be taken to the medical infirmary. And Cheon, who was still conscious and in a state of thinking, asked Nano to turn on the recovery mode. Meanwhile, the elder from the 5th clan watched everything that was happening in amazement. She knew her ability like all 5 fingers, and could not believe that Prince Cheon easily withstood the energy wave. Lee Hwamyoung told the 5th elder that he would be ready to take Cheon as his disciple, if he were not the son of the Lord himself. All these conversations were listened to by the 2nd bodyguard Seob, who could not tear himself away from his bottle of wine. It seemed to Seob that Cheon was able to pass his first test for a reason. It seemed to him that Cheon had some kind of unknown power, but Lee Hwamyoung said indifferently that it was none of his business and suggested that he go and drink a bottle of wine again. Seob did not pay attention to the words of his comrade. At that moment, he was only interested in Prince Cheon, who possessed incredible power. After some time on the territory of the academy, in the academic infirmary, which was located in the main building, there was a doctor from the magic academy, Baek Chong-myeon, who was studying something. At one moment, he heard extraneous sounds. Dr. Pak realized that he had a job to do, immediately ran to the door and opened it with a stunning look. He saw an orderly who was holding a stretcher, and Prince Cheon was lying there on these. Dr. Beck was very glad that he would finally have a patient. He immediately began to accompany his guests, walking on par with them. And the orderlies looked at him as if he were crazy. But when he saw the barely alive Cheon, he was very surprised. He could not understand how the first test could harm the heir so much. He asked the orderlies for details, who told him about the internal injury to Cheon's organs. The doctor couldn't believe that Cheon could have suffered such damage due to the sound wave. But the orderlies said that he did not have Negong. Peck studied medicine for about 10 years, and in all this time he has never seen so many consequences due to internal injuries. Suddenly the orderlies called out to him, assigned all duties to Dr. Pak, and went about their business. At this time, Baek was fully checking Cheon's body and his pulse, and was thinking about something. But Cheon at this time had already subconsciously woken up and scolded himself for curing absolutely all his injuries, knowing in advance that he would end up in the infirmary. The doctor, after examining Prince Cheon, realized that his pulse and heart rhythm were irregular, which meant that he had suffered quite serious injuries. But such an amount of blood surprised Dr. Pak, because even if he bites his tongue hard, such an effect will not be even close. While the doctor was thinking about what to do next, someone burst into the room with a roar. The doctor almost fell from fear. It turned out to be Right Guard Seob, who couldn't stop drinking from his bottle. When he saw Puck, he laughed because this time, and now he decided to become a doctor at the academy. Dr. Park came to his senses and asked why Seob came to the infirmary, because he did not receive any injuries. But the drunken and aggressive Seob did not like such hospitality, and he began to yell at Park, who barely calmed him down. Park knew that he would never understand his aggression, but Seob himself looked in Cheon's direction. He was clearly interested in the prince. Cheon didn't understand why Seob came to the infirmary and was afraid that he would realize that Cheon was faking. But suddenly, Seob came very close to Cheon and asked why he was pretending to be asleep. Cheon didn't react at all, and then Seob lifted him from a lying position using the power of Negong. And Cheon didn't even understand why he was doing this. Dr. Park looked at this with great surprise. He did not know that Guard Seob had such powerful strength and capabilities. Cheon understood that Seob sat him down at the expense of Negong, but he could not move since his body was still injured. Seob understood that Cheon would pretend forever. Then he threatened to punch him in the face if Cheon did not react. Then the dissatisfied Cheon had no choice, and he opened his eyes. And immediately, with an aggressive intonation, Cheon asked how Seob was able to reveal him and in what way. Seob didn't answer. He just laughed loudly and called Cheon funny. Finally, Seob answered that any experienced warrior can determine sleep by the frequency of breathing movements. Cheon was very surprised by this answer and was very interested in learning this skill. Seob decided to praise Cheon once again by comparing him with others. He said that Cheon is much stronger than the other guys with his courage and will. But the dissatisfied Cheon didn't care about the praise in his direction, because he understood that Seob came here for a reason. Seob continued his lecture about weak kids and candidates who are looking for easy ways unlike Cheon, although Cheon himself understood that he had done nothing at all. Ultimately, Seob said that he thought Cheon had talent. But suddenly, he was interrupted by Park, who assured Seob that Cheon was feeling bad, but Seob asked him to shut up. But suddenly, Cheon suddenly vomited blood. Seob clearly didn't expect this, but Park only confirmed his words. Then Seob walked up to Cheon without a word, and with the help of some force, without touching, gave some negong to Cheon. From such strong pressure and surge of strength, Cheon was pushed back towards the pillow. And Seob said that he wanted to take Cheon as his student, and he said it with such pride that it would simply be impossible to refuse. Cheon himself was in shock and did not know what to answer to the guard. Cheon didn't think at all and decided to ask again. Seob thought that Cheon was a little deaf and repeated the question. Prince Cheon started asking Seob if he knew who he was. Guard Seob did not understand what the prince wanted to say. Then Cheon got to the point and said that he thinks that the 6 great clans will hate Seob if they find out that he wants to take him on as a student. But these words only made Seob laugh again, because in his opinion, they would not do anything to him. Cheon began to think again. He understood that this was a great opportunity, but there was also the possibility that this was some kind of trap. Then Dr. Park finally realized that Cheon was the prince of the 7th clan. The doctor could not believe that Cheon lost so much blood because of other students. Cheon didn't know what to answer, and said that he would already have a teacher at the academy. But Seob was already starting to rage. He felt like he was already begging Cheon. Seob decided to resort to extreme measures, something that Cheon simply could not refuse. He took something out from under his kimono and confidently threw it with all his strength near Cheon. It was some kind of piece of paper that, according to Seob, will become a golden compass in the magic academy for Cheon. Cheon ended up in the infirmary because of the entrance test. So Seob said that he would not be able to go further without negong. Cheon still doubted and answered with difficulty, because for him, it was a rather difficult choice. Seob said that while Cheon will rot in this place, other candidates will have long since advanced in their capabilities. Seob finished his speech and picked up the bottle again, and Cheon partially agreed with him, but he needed a little more time to avert suspicions. Suddenly Seob changed his face again and with a grin asked why Cheon was sent here by the red-headed bastard. Cheon didn't understand anything at first, but then he guessed that Seob was referring to the right guard Lee Hwa-myung, who sent him here due to internal injuries. Seob agreed with him, but asked a skeptical question whether Cheon thought his actions were strange at the very beginning, because there were many other children with injuries too. Seob said that many people from Murim City can recover through meditation, and medication and the help of a doctor will only speed up the process. Cheon began to think, but Seob began to prove the fact that they simply did not need medical help. Cheon realized that he was alone here because he was unable to heal himself thanks to martial arts. Cheon thought even more, and Seob already understood that he would soon be able to force Cheon to become his student. Seob said that a person without the gift of healing would not be able to survive for long in this academy, but Cheon had a Nano Machine, so he was not worried at all. But Cheon understood that he still needed Negong, and without him it would be very difficult to survive in the future. But suddenly, Cheon remembered about the rewards for passing the first test, and especially about the first floor of the library. Seob said that you can't just enter and leave the academy's library at will, because after passing the test, you can only enter it once. Cheon, without thinking everything through at first and forgetting that he had Nano, was very surprised and a little worried, and Seob only made the situation worse by saying he said that no one would be able to study all the most important books of the library in the public domain. Also, during your first and only visit to the library, you can stay in it for only 2 hours. Cheon didn't like this news even more, but Seob said that on higher floors the time also increases. Moreover, you cannot write down absolutely any information, but only memorize it. Memorizing 2 books is already considered a large amount. Then Cheon remembered Nano, because in 2 hours Cheon could scan not 2 books, but perhaps 100 without any problems. Cheon remembered his words that he was very different from other children, but the main character did not understand what it meant. Cheon finally began to understand that in order to survive the threat of the 6 great clans, he must become his disciple. Abruptly, Cheon remembered the piece of paper and asked Seob about Negong. Seob confirmed Cheon's words with a malicious smile on his face and even praised him for being a determined guy. Therefore, Cheon abruptly knelt down and accepted the right to be the disciple of the right guard, Seobi. Seob understood why he smiled arrogantly and realized that he had won and was able to persuade Cheon. But suddenly for Cheon, at the expense of Naegong, guard Seob raised him to his feet, and he said that a child of Lord Cheon's blood should not bow to anyone except the Lord himself. Seob gave Cheon a rest until his return and instructed him to learn and memorize Naegong on his own, after which Seob left and asked Dr. Park to look after Cheon while he was away. The doctor congratulated Cheon on his new mentorship from the right guard. But at the same time, Cheon was in poor condition due to injuries. After the conversation, Dr. Park decided to go get special medical instruments. And Cheon thought about it and realized that thanks to Nano and the right guard, he has now received a lot of privileges and abilities. Meanwhile, in the area of the Magic Academy for practicing martial arts and meditation, while Cheon lay in the infirmary, the students trained to control their energy and technique through meditation. New students also practiced meditation techniques and learned martial arts from more experienced mentors. Then suddenly a stranger flew up to the left guard of the first selection test. This stranger's name was Huo Jin Chang, and he was a senior martial artist. He said that counting all the people, 415 people passed the first test. Lee Hwam-young was very surprised by the results, because they were very deplorable. Last time 200 more people entered, and all this was due to the anger of the fifth elder. He also reported that some of the cadets who failed considered the test unfair. It was like this. A group of angry cadets approached, who did not understand why they were kicked out, because they did not faint. But the person in charge of security just grinned and said that it was time for them to go to work in agriculture, and they had nothing to do here. He ordered the martial artists to forcefully throw out these disgruntled students from the Magic Academy. They attacked the rioters without any hesitation, throwing one of them to the ground. They simply threw the other students aside and told them to quickly get out of here. The master also noticed that they would not be able to resist other students, and they still would not gain anything useful from this situation. But Lee Hwam-young thought differently, because it was because of the 7th cadet Cheon that this first test was much more difficult. The master noticed that among the participants who passed the test, there were many outstanding talents. When a large number of people were healed after the first test, Lee Hwam-young congratulated everyone on passing to the next stage. He said that all cadets would be awarded a bronze medal, denoting the lowest rank in the academy, and for the following 4 years, all would be trained as cadets. Lee also announced the most important rule of this academy. Every student must answer any question only. That's right, sir. Meanwhile, in the infirmary, Dr. Park finished collecting instruments for treating Cheon and headed towards him. Park approached Cheon, who wanted to ask him something. Park sat down opposite Cheon's bed, and then the prince asked about the state of his health. Park said that Cheon would need 11 to 15 days to fully recover. Cheon was simply shocked by this news. Cheon understood that if the nano-robot turned on the self-healing mode, then his body would be as good as new in just a couple of seconds. But if Cheon recovers so quickly, then everyone will definitely suspect something, especially Dr. Park, who is closely monitoring Cheon's health. However, if Cheon takes so long to be treated, he will fall behind in training, and it is unknown what will await Cheon after recovery. But suddenly Dr. Park decided to cheer him up and said that thanks to his unusual treatment, Cheon would be able to recover much faster than planned. Cheon was still upset because it would take a lot of time, which was very important to him. Dr. Park also promised not to tell anyone that Cheon would learn martial arts from right guard Seobi, and then he abruptly snatched the blanket from Cheon because he was going to give him acupuncture, and for this, Cheon would have to take off his clothes. Dr. Park saw Cheon's body and was very surprised at how muscular it was. He definitely did not expect this from the son of a lord. Dr. Park knew very well that Cheon had not studied martial arts, but his physical component was in excellent shape. Dr. Park wondered how Cheon had such abilities without studying Naegong. He thought that Cheon had another special Weigong technique, after which Park took one of the needles and began to carry out his treatment. He wanted to inject the prince directly in the chest, but suddenly Nano activated self-defense mode when it detected a sharp iron needle. Cheon asked Nano to turn off his body's protection, since this was not an attack on his body, but only a treatment for quick healing. Nano heard the prince and turned off self-defense, and Cheon exhaled with relief, after which the doctor looked at him a little mysteriously. The main character noticed that the pain in his stomach began to go away, and Nano immediately began to talk about acupuncture techniques. Suddenly, a very smart and brilliant idea came to Cheon's head. While Dr. Park was putting away his needles, Cheon asked again how quickly Nano would recover thanks to him. And he asked Nano, while Park was putting some suppositories on Cheon's stomach, if he could cure Cheon and make it invisible to others. Nano said that he could do the recovery in a special way, and the pulse would be similar to the pulse of a wounded person. Cheon finally made up his mind and asked Nano to start a full recovery and then use the pulse function. Meanwhile, the master, and with him Lee Hwam-young, began a meeting of cadets. Lee Hwam-young, in a surprisingly calm tone, was about to explain the next test that awaits the cadets. It will be held jointly, and to complete it, you will need to know tactics and strategies. And after its successful completion, the cadet becomes an intermediate-level warrior. But there will be only 20 days for all the preparations and the like for the cadets. Lee Hwam-young also clarified why everyone was divided into groups of 20, because after 2 tests, only 10 left. After such a statement, everyone got excited, because some teams did not have more than 1 outstanding cadet. And as usual, it was absolutely all the same to the cadets of the first 6 clans, who were confident in their successful passing of the next test. For today, Lee Hwam-young finished his speech and told everyone to go back to the dorm and rest. After all, from tomorrow all cadets will be trained by 2 abnormal instructors who recently knocked down 2 candidates. In the same evening, on the street near the academy, Group 8 instructor Thor Im-pyong stood. Cadet number 3 approached him and he indifferently asked what he needed. It was Cadet Mukim, who had a very intrusive question. Thor immediately stopped him and said that he could not answer questions about training, but Mukim did not need this. Mukim said that he is almost sure that he will become the leader of his 8th group. He also said that Cadet number 7 is in the infirmary and belongs to his group. And due to his injuries, he will not be able to attend the group test, and because of this, the entire group may fail the 2nd test. Therefore, Mukim, with good intentions, wants to visit him and tell him everything that happened at the ceremony today. While Thor was thinking, Mukim, with an evil smile in his head, was just cranking out a plan to destroy Cheon in the same infirmary. But suddenly he was knocked out of his thoughts by Thor, who considered his idea very excellent and even praised him. But Thor himself will personally go tell Cheon everything. Mukim definitely didn't expect such a turn of events. The dumbfounded Mukim stammered and said that he could do it himself. But Instructor Thor said in a warning and serious voice that access to the main building was prohibited for cadets. Meanwhile, closer to midnight in the main building of the academy, Thor almost fell into shock at the news of Cheon's 14 days of required and permanent hospitalization due to his injury. The doctor calmly explained everything to him, and there was no way not to believe his words, because Cheon had really serious injuries. This news shocked Thor, who did not expect this from a man who did not even move during the first test. But however, he didn't want Cheon to ruin everything and fail his group's test, which would last 3 weeks. When Thor left, he remembered how Cheon was taken away on a stretcher to the infirmary. He didn't like the possibility of failure, and he was sure that Cheon would not be able to pass the 2nd test, only on his luck. Closer to late night, when the moon was already at its highest point, some strange silhouette ran at great speed towards the main building of the academy. A couple of hours later, towards early morning, someone kicked in the door to Cheon's room, which flew out with a roar. This unknown person was Seob, who was laughing because Cheon was scared half to death. Cheon came to his senses and only now realized that his teacher had come at such an early hour and did not understand why. Cheon reluctantly got out of bed and greeted his master. Seobu asked Cheon about the homework he gave him yesterday. Cheon completely forgot about him and didn't really understand what exactly Seob was talking about, because he didn't remember anything anymore. But suddenly it dawned on him that it was a note with the Naguan breathing technique, which Seob asked to learn before he arrived. From Seob's face, it was clear that he was not very happy that Cheon didn't do his homework. But Cheon had already learned it thanks to Nano, and was completely healthy thanks to him too, and proudly answered Seob that he had done everything. Seob praised Cheon and said that he could teach Cheon for only 2 weeks and no more. Cheon was very scared by such news. Also, Seob will only be able to come to Cheon while he is in the infirmary, and when he returns to the dorm, he will no longer be able to study with Seob. Cheon remembered that in the Magic Academy it is forbidden to train people from outside, and therefore he could have big problems if they find out about it. Cheon thought that Seob would be very stubborn, but it turned out to be quite the opposite, and therefore thanked him for his time. Then Seob suggested starting training right now since there was little time. But Cheon didn't expect morning training at all. But Seoba answered his stupid question with rage that there was little time anyway, and he, as a teacher, would train Cheon now and not ever later. Seob literally ordered Cheon to sit with his back to him and not say anything else, but only carry out his instructions. Seob sat on Cheon's back and was glad that Cheon was able to learn his 1,000 warrior breath. He again, without explanation, directed his hand to Cheon's back, and Cheon again asked what he was going to do, to which Seob replied that he was going to give him a flow of energy. Hearing this, Cheon was both scared and surprised, because he clearly didn't want to go through this procedure. Because Seoba's great-grandfather came up with this sophisticated way of transferring energy. Because in such a short time, Cheon could not spend much time on the study itself. Immediately, literally 1,000 volts of electricity hit Cheon's body and swept throughout his body at a rapid speed. Nano suddenly activated and began to speak about the processes in the body, about the transition of intangible energy into the blood, and Seob carried out the process himself and was no less surprised than Cheon. Seob couldn't believe that Cheon didn't learn anything because his circulation doesn't see any obstacles, and Cheon's body was so muscular, as if it had undergone strong training, but as Cheon remembers, he did not study martial arts at all. Then Seob began to suspect from his look that the only option was to help the Lord. Cheon will only need 7 days in the infirmary to gain enough Nagong in his body. Meanwhile, in the dormitory, someone forcefully knocked out the heir to the Poison Clan right from his foot. His group immediately ran up to him, a couple of people took him by the arms, and others began to threaten the offender. Indeed, in the Magic Academy, according to the 12th cadet, Bayek Ki, only strength decides, and therefore, after defeating the cadet of the Poison Clan, he will lead his group. After quite a lot of time, it finally ended, and Seob breathed a sigh of relief. And Cheon himself did not feel the body at all, and was barely conscious, and Seob asked him if that flow had filled. Seob knew that the first time of this procedure is very painful. But this is the only option to teach people like Cheon the Niguan technique in the shortest possible time. Seob also set a goal of exactly 7 days, during which Cheon must learn Nagong and gain enough of it. Cheon looked at Seob and realized that he had spent quite a lot of Niguan on him. He was probably doing all this for some purpose. Seob finished the training and said not to forget about the breathing method and remember everything well. When Seob left, Cheon became serious about producing a large amount of Nagwan in a week, no matter the cost.